The massive space station called Nexus Prime slowly turned in the darkness of space. Its lights twinkled like stars as ships from dozens of different worlds came and went from its many docking bays. Inside the station's giant meeting hall, hundreds of alien beings sat in rows of curved seats that went up like stairs in a huge circle. Ambassador Jake Morrison walked into the hall with his small team. Commander Lisa Hayes followed close behind him, her uniform crisp and clean. Dr. Ben Carter carried a data pad full of important information, while Amy Foster checked her notes one last time. They were the only humans in a room full of strange creatures. The Zephyrians looked like giant octopuses with purple skin and many arms that never stopped moving. The Vraxians were huge and covered in thick armor that made them look like walking tanks. The crystalline beings sparkled like living diamonds, their bodies made of some kind of clear, hard material that caught the light and threw it around the room. Jake had been coming to these meetings for 15 years. His hair was gray now, and lines showed around his eyes from all the stress and disappointment. He had started this job full of hope, thinking humans could work together with all these other species to make the galaxy a better place. Now he felt tired and frustrated. The meeting started like all the others. A tall, thin alien with blue skin read out numbers and reports in a boring voice. Jake tried to pay attention, but he had heard it all before. The same complaints, the same arguments, the same decisions that always seemed to go against what humans wanted or needed. Then the Zephyrian leader stood. His name was Chancellor Vrex, and his many arms waved around as he spoke. "I bring forward motion 7743X, he said in a voice that sounded like water gurgling. "We must stop the humans from expanding into the Henderson-Clark and Asimov star systems." Jake felt his heart sink. These were 3-star systems that humans had found and settled 40 years ago. Real people lived there now. Families had built homes, started businesses, and raised children on those worlds. Over 2 million humans called those places home. Other aliens in the room started making noise. The Vraxians pounded their armored fists on their desks, making a sound like thunder. The crystalline beings rang like bells when they got excited. Most of them seemed to agree with the Zephyrian proposal. Jake stood up and asked to speak. The room got quiet, but he could feel that most of the aliens were not really interested in what he had to say. They never were. "Honored delegates," Jake began, using the polite words he had learned over many years of diplomatic training. Humans discovered these systems 4 decades ago. Captain Roy Jenkins and his wife Kate Jenkins led the first ships there. They found empty worlds with no signs of other intelligent life. He held up his data pad and projected images into the air above the center of the room. The pictures showed human cities with tall buildings, farms with green fields, and spaceports busy with activity. 2 million human beings live in these systems now. They have built schools, hospitals, and factories. These are their homes, Doctor. Carter handed Jake more data. "We have star charts that prove humans were the first to map these systems. We have colony records that show exactly when each settlement was founded. We have birth certificates for children who were born on these worlds." But the aliens in the room were not impressed. Chancellor Vrex waved his arms dismissively. "Human records do not follow proper xenological verification protocols," he said, using fancy words that meant the aliens did not want to accept human proof. The huge Vraxian War Prime stood up next. His name was Thaklor, and he was twice as tall as any human. His voice boomed across the room like an earthquake. "Primitive species cannot claim control over strategic locations. These systems have valuable resources that the galaxy needs." Jake felt anger rising in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "Humans are not primitive. We have contributed technology, resources, and personnel to galactic peacekeeping for 37 years. We have honored every treaty and followed every rule." "Nevertheless," said a crystalline being whose voice sounded like wind chimes, "the motion stands. We will vote now." The vote happened quickly. Jake watched the numbers appear on the big screen at the front of the room. 847 votes in favor of taking away human colonies, 23 votes against, 12 abstentions, which meant some aliens did not vote at all. The humans, despite representing 50 billion people living on over 200 worlds, got only one vote. The same as species that had only a few thousand members. It had always been this way, and Jake suddenly realized it would never change. Commander Hayes leaned over and whispered in his ear, "Sir, the fleet is ready and waiting for your signal." Jake looked around the room one more time. He saw the smug expressions on alien faces. He heard them already talking about dividing up human colonies among themselves. Some were laughing, making sounds like hissing steam or grinding rocks. For 37 years, humans had tried to be good members of this galactic community. They had shared their medical knowledge to help fight diseases. They had sent their young men and women to die in peacekeeping missions to protect smaller species. They had paid enormous amounts of money in fees and taxes to keep the Galactic Council running. And for what? To be treated like children who could not be trusted to govern their own colonies. To watch their people's homes be given away to aliens who had never even visited those worlds. Jake stood up slowly. The room grew quiet as everyone turned to look at the human ambassador. His voice was steady when he spoke, but Lisa could hear the pain and anger underneath his calm words. Honored delegates, for 37 years, humanity has participated in this council. We have given our technology, our resources, and our children's lives to keep peace in the galaxy. We have honored every treaty, paid every fee, and followed every protocol. He paused and looked around the amphitheater. Some aliens looked bored. Others seemed annoyed that he was still talking. A few actually looked curious about what he would say next. But today you have made something very clear to us. We are not your partners, we are not your equals. We are just guests that you allow to stay as long as we do what you want and give you what you need. The room was completely silent now. Even the constant humming and clicking sounds that different species made had stopped. Therefore, Jake said, his voice getting stronger, effective immediately, the Terran Federation withdraws from the Galactic Council. The silence exploded into chaos. Aliens jumped up from their seats shouting and making all kinds of angry noises. War Prime Thacklor's voice boomed over everyone else's. "You cannot simply leave, human. There are procedures you must follow." Jake smiled for the first time in months. "Procedures that you just showed us mean nothing when it suits your purposes." He nodded to Lisa, who immediately activated her communicator device. The signal went out instantly to the human fleet waiting at the edge of the star system. Within minutes, every human ship, every human trade vessel, and every human diplomat began leaving council space. The great walkout had begun. 3 weeks after the humans left, things started going wrong across the galaxy. It began small at first, like a tiny crack in a dam that nobody noticed. But small problems have a way of becoming big problems very quickly. On the mining world of Kepler 442b, plant manager Zektar stared at his computer screen in disbelief. The Vraxian looked like a walking tank covered in thick gray armor, but right now he felt very small and helpless. His mining operation had just ground to a complete stop. "Sir," said his assistant, a younger Vraxian named Koldan, "we are out of quantum drill bits. The shipment from the humans was supposed to arrive yesterday." Zektar's 4 eyes blinked slowly. "Contact the backup suppliers. The crystalline hegemony should have what we need." But the crystalline beings wanted to be paid in rare earth elements that the Vraxians considered sacred. It would be like asking humans to trade away pieces of their churches. The Aquatic Alliance had drill bits too, but their technology was made for underwater use and would not work in the methane-rich atmosphere of Kepler 442b. "What about the insectoid collective?" Koldan suggested. Zektar made a rumbling sound that meant he was thinking hard. "They want payment in live prey animals. Our people do not hunt. For 40 years, humans had served as middlemen in thousands of trades like this. They could talk to species that refused to deal with each other directly. They understood different cultures and could find ways to make deals work. Now they were gone, and nobody else wanted to do this difficult job." Back on Earth, Admiral Susan Blake sat in her office at Federation Command. She had short brown hair and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. Her desk was covered with messages from alien species, and more arrived every hour. "Admiral," said her aide, Lieutenant Carl Johnson. "The Zephyrians are offering us triple the normal price for medical supplies." Their ambassador sounds desperate. Susan looked at the message on her screen. It was from Piptel, a small, nervous Zephyrian who had always been polite to humans during council meetings. The message was full of fancy diplomatic language, but the meaning was clear. His people were dying and only human medicine could save them. "What's the situation?" Susan asked. Carl consulted his tablet. "A plague broke out in the Zephyrian home system 2 weeks ago. Normally they would have treated it with medicines from our biolabs. But now they can't get our medicines because they voted to steal our colonies," Susan finished. She felt a little sad for Piptel, who had always been kind to her. But she felt more angry about the 2 million humans whose homes the Zephyrians had. "Try to take away. Send a polite response," she said. "Tell them we are no longer part of the Galactic Council and cannot provide aid to Council member species." At the same time, Secretary of Defense Mike Torres was dealing with his own flood of desperate messages. Mike was a tough old soldier who had fought in 3 different wars. His gray beard and scarred hands told the story of a man who had seen a lot of fighting. A Zephyrian envoy had actually traveled all the way to Earth to beg for help. The small alien sat in Torres's office, his tentacles wiggling with nervousness. "Please, Secretary Torres," Piptel pleaded through his translation device. "This is a humanitarian crisis. Surely we can make some temporary arrangement." Torres leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "Should have thought of that before you voted to steal our colonies, friend. But people are dying." "Yeah, well, people die in wars too. And taking away someone's home without cause is an act of war in my book." The problems were not just about trade and medicine. The Galactic Council had kept peace in the galaxy for over 300 years, but that peace had depended heavily on human peacekeeping forces. Human ships were fast and well-armed. Human soldiers were brave and well-trained. Human diplomats were good at solving problems before they became wars. Now the humans were gone and aggressive species saw opportunity. The insectoid collective had always been trouble. They looked like giant ants with shiny black shells and cold, emotionless eyes. For decades they had wanted to expand their territory, but had been held back by the threat of human intervention. Now they began moving their scout fleets into neutral zones that had been protected by human patrols. Small species that had relied on Galactic Council protection watched in fear as insectoid ships appeared at the edges of their star systems. On the Council station Nexus Prime, Chancellor Vrex paced back and forth in his private chambers. His purple tentacles writhed with anxiety as he read report after report of disasters spreading across the galaxy. Trade was down by 34% and falling fast. 3 small wars had broken out in sectors that had been peaceful for decades. The Council's own budget was in crisis because human contributions had made up nearly a quarter of all funding. "Sir," said his assistant, a young Zephyrian named Clythe, "the emergency session is ready to begin." Vrex's tentacles drooped with exhaustion. "Another emergency session. How many is that this week?" 14, sir." The emergency sessions were not helping. Every species blamed every other species for the growing crisis. The Aquatic Alliance said it was the insectoids' fault for being too aggressive. The insectoids said it was the Zephyrians' fault for being too weak. Everyone blamed everyone else, but nobody wanted to admit the real truth. They had made a terrible mistake when they drove the humans away. Dr. Helen Garcia sat in her laboratory on Mars trying to focus on her research. She was a small woman with curly red hair and thick glasses, but she was one of the smartest xenobiologists in human space. For 20 years she had worked with alien scientists to study diseases and develop new medicines. Her computer chimed with an incoming message. It was from Resonance of Deep Thought, a crystalline being she had worked with for many years. The message was encrypted and very short. Council requires human medical expertise urgently. Plague spreading through hegemony. Terms negotiable. Helen stared at the message for a long time. She remembered working late nights with Resonance, sharing ideas and discoveries that had saved millions of lives. They had been friends, or as close to friends as a human and a living crystal could be. But she also remembered watching the vote 3 weeks ago. Resonance had voted to take away human colonies. Every single member of the crystalline hegemony had voted against humanity. Helen deleted the message without replying. She had new work to do now, helping to build independent human research stations that would not be controlled by aliens who saw humans as useful tools rather than equal partners. The cascade of problems continued to spread. On the industrial world of Vega 7, factories shut down because they could not get replacement parts that only humans manufactured. In the Rigel system, a trade dispute between two alien species turned violent because there were no human mediators to help them find a peaceful solution. The mineral folk, who looked like walking rocks with glowing eyes, declared independence from the crystalline hegemony. They had been unhappy clients for years, but fear of human intervention had kept them in line. Now they figured the weakened hegemony could not stop them. The silicon-based architects of Kepler 186 followed suit the next day. Then the energy beings of the Proxima Collective announced they too were leaving their overlords. In his office on Luna, President Mary Collins read the intelligence reports with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Mary was a tall woman with silver hair and kind eyes that could turn very hard when she was angry. She had been elected just 2 months ago, partly because voters wanted someone who would stand up to alien bullying. Captain Steve Murphy, her military aide, briefed her on the latest developments. "Ma'am, the Vraxian Empire lost another colony world yesterday. The rebels are using defensive tactics they learned from our joint training exercises." Mary nodded. "And the Galactic Council's response?" "Complete chaos, ma'am. They're holding emergency sessions twice a day, but they can't agree on anything. The Aquatic Alliance is threatening to withdraw from the Mutual Defense Pact. The insectoids are expanding into 3 more neutral systems, and the economic reports." Steve shook his head. "It's a disaster." Meanwhile, in the Outer Rim territories, human colonies were thriving like never before. The Henderson system, one of the 3 that had started this whole crisis, had become a major hub for independent trade. Governor Jim Powell stood on the observation deck of Henderson Station, watching ships from dozens of different species dock at his port. These were not council member species. They were rebels, refugees, and independent traders who had no love for the galactic government. "Governor," said his aide, Lieutenant Nancy Walsh, "we just processed our 50,000th asylum request. This month, the tentacled traders of Rigel want to relocate their entire commercial fleet to our space." Jim smiled. The tentacled traders were one of the most successful merchant groups in the galaxy, but they had been heavily taxed and regulated by the Council. Now they wanted to be free. "Approved," he said. "Set them up with docking facilities in the Outer Ring." Back on Nexus Prime, the situation was getting worse every day. The Insectoid Collective had just launched a major attack on 3 Zephyrian colony worlds. The Council voted to send a peacekeeping fleet, but without human ships and human soldiers, they could only assemble a weak force that was easily defeated. Chancellor Vrex sat alone in his chambers, staring out at the stars. A message waited on his desk, one he had been putting off reading. It was from his old friend Claith, who had served as translator during many meetings with Ambassador Morrison. Finally, he opened it. The message was simple and used the informal language that would have caused a scandal during normal diplomatic times. "Jake, we were wrong. The Council needs humanity. Name your terms." Frex knew that Morrison was retired now, living quietly on Mars with his wife Linda. But maybe, just maybe, the old ambassador would listen to reason. The galaxy was falling apart, and everyone was starting to realize that the humans had been the glue holding it all together. 6 months had passed since the humans walked out, and the galaxy was falling apart faster than anyone had thought possible. What started as trade problems had grown into something much worse. Wars were breaking out everywhere, governments were collapsing, and entire civilizations were crumbling. The crystalline hegemony, once one of the most powerful groups in the galaxy, was now fighting for its life. The plague that had started in Zephyrian space had spread to their worlds too. Without human medical help, 12% of their population had died. Their crystal bodies, normally bright and clear, had turned cloudy and dull from the disease. 3 of their client species saw this weakness and decided it was time to break free. The mineral folk of the Vega system were the first to rebel. These rock-like beings had been forced to mine precious metals for the hegemony for over 200 years. Now they declared independence and sealed off their mining tunnels. The silicon-based architects of Kepler 186 followed the next day. They had built beautiful crystal cities for their masters, but had never been allowed to own property themselves. Now they claimed their homeworld and began building structures for themselves instead of others. The energy beings of the Proxima Collective were the third to revolt. These creatures of pure light had powered the hegemony's space stations and ships for generations. When they withdrew their services, entire sectors went dark. President Mary Collins sat in her office on Earth, reading the daily intelligence reports. The woman with silver hair looked tired but satisfied as she reviewed the chaos spreading across former council space. Captain Steve Murphy entered with the morning briefing. "Ma'am, the Vraxian Empire lost 4 more colony worlds this week. The rebel groups are using guerrilla tactics they learned during joint operations with our forces." Mary nodded and sipped her coffee. "What about the council's response?" "Complete panic, ma'am. They're calling emergency sessions twice a day now, but they spend most of the time arguing about who's to blame. The Aquatic Alliance is threatening to leave the council entirely. The insectoids are taking advantage of the chaos to grab more territory." Steve pulled up a holographic map showing the galaxy. Red zones marked areas of active warfare, yellow showed economic collapse, and green indicated stable regions. Most of the map was red or yellow. The only large green area was human space, which had actually grown bigger as refugees and independent traders flocked to human protection. Meanwhile, in the Outer Rim territories, human colonies were experiencing a golden age. The Henderson system, the same one that the Council had tried to take away, was now the busiest trading hub in 3 sectors. Governor Jim Powell walked through the main concourse of Henderson Station, amazed at what he saw. Aliens from dozens of species hurried back and forth, conducting business, making deals, and starting new lives. These weren't council species anymore. They were refugees, rebels, and free traders who had chosen to work with humans instead of the failing galactic government. "Governor," called out Nancy Walsh, his chief aide, "the latest asylum numbers are in. We processed 60,000 applications this week alone. The tentacled traders of Rigel brought their entire merchant fleet. They're setting up permanent operations in our outer system." Jim smiled as he watched a group of young alien children playing together in the station's park area. Their parents had fled the chaos in council space and found safety in human territory. "Any problems with integration?" "None at all, sir. The new arrivals are grateful to be here, and they're contributing to our economy. Tax revenues are up 40% this quarter." The situation in council space continued to deteriorate. The Insectoid Collective, sensing weakness everywhere, launched their most ambitious expansion in 3 centuries. Their black ships, looking like giant flying beetles, swept into system after system that had once been protected by human peacekeeping forces. The Zephyrians, already weakened by plague and economic collapse, faced a full-scale invasion of their home system. Chancellor Vrek stood on the bridge of his flagship watching insectoid battlecruisers approach his homeworld. His purple tentacles shook with fear and rage. "Sir," said his aide Clythe, "the defense fleet is taking heavy casualties. We've lost 6 ships already, and the enemy hasn't even reached the outer defensive ring." Vrex's 4 eyes stared at the tactical display. The insectoids had twice as many ships, and their vessels were designed purely for war. The Zephyrian fleet, built for exploration and peacekeeping, was no match for them. "Send a message to the Galactic Council," Vrex ordered. "Request immediate military assistance under the Mutual Defense Pact." But when the Council tried to assemble a rescue fleet, they discovered how much they had depended on human forces. The mighty armada that had once kept peace in the galaxy could barely scrape together 50 ships. Most of them were old, poorly maintained, and crewed by species that had no experience working together without human coordination. The hastily assembled fleet arrived at the Zephyrian home system just in time to watch the insectoids destroy the last of the local defenses. In the first engagement, the Council lost 20 ships and achieved nothing. The remaining vessels retreated in confusion, leaving the Zephyrians to face invasion alone. On Mars, retired Ambassador Jake Morrison sat in his garden with his wife, Linda, reading the news reports on his tablet. Jake's hair was completely white now, and the stress lines around his eyes had deepened. But for the first time in years, he looked peaceful. "Listen to this," he said to Linda, who was tending to her tomato plants. "The Council has sent another formal request for negotiations. This is the 5th one this month." Linda Morrison looked up from her gardening. She was a retired ship captain who had lost her brother in a Council peacekeeping mission that the Council later claimed never happened. Her blue eyes were hard when she spoke about galactic politics. "What are they offering this time?" Jake scrolled through the message. "Full membership with expanded voting rights, veto power over major decisions, exemption from most Council regulations. Oh, and they're willing to formally recognize our claim to all disputed territories." "Too little, too late," Linda said, turning back to her plants. "They had 37 years to treat us fairly. They chose not to." The message had come through Clythe, the young Zephyrian who had always been kind to humans during Council meetings. It was written in simple, desperate language. "Jake, please. We know we were wrong. The galaxy is falling apart without humanity. People are dying. Worlds are burning. The Council needs you. We need you. Name any terms you want. Just please help us." Jake had read the message 3 times, feeling a mixture of sadness and satisfaction. He remembered the young Zephyrian who had always tried to be fair, who had sometimes voted against his own species when he thought humans were right. Clythe was one of the good ones. But he also remembered War Prime Thaklor calling humans primitive. He remembered Chancellor Vrex dismissing human evidence without even looking at it. He remembered watching the vote that would have stolen the homes of 2 million human families. "Are you going to answer?" Linda asked. Jake deleted the message without replying. "I'm retired. This is someone else's problem now." The collapse accelerated over the following weeks. The Aquatic Alliance, true to their threats, formally withdrew from the Galactic Council to form their own confederation. 17 other aquatic species joined them immediately. Their representative gave a brief statement through a translation device. "The humans showed us that we don't need the Council to prosper. We choose to follow their example and seek our own destiny among the stars." The Reptilian Dominion announced their withdrawal 2 days later. The gaseous entities of the nebula cluster followed within the week. Each departure made the remaining Council members more desperate and more willing to turn on each other. On Nexus Prime, the great Council station that had once been the center of galactic civilization, entire sections were now dark and empty. The station could barely afford to keep life support running in the main conference areas. Maintenance robots sat idle because there was no money to repair them when they broke down. Chancellor Vrex walked through the empty corridors, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The station that had once housed representatives from 800 species now had fewer than 30 occupied diplomatic quarters. The restaurants were closed, the shopping areas were empty, and the vast library that had contained the knowledge of 1,000 worlds was slowly being sold off to pay debts. In the main conference chamber, the remaining delegates met in what had become a daily ritual of blame and desperation. The chamber that had once been filled with hundreds of different species now looked pathetically empty with only 27 members present. "We must face reality," said the representative from the Crystal Gardens, a small, peaceful species that had somehow survived the chaos. "The Council as we knew it is finished. Perhaps it is time to consider dissolution." War Prime Thaklor, his armor now dented and scarred from recent battles, pounded his ceremonial hammer. "We do not surrender. The Vraxian Empire will never bow to human arrogance." "Then you will die with your pride intact," replied the Aquatic Alliance observer, who had remained only to watch the final collapse. "The humans have shown us a better way. Freedom, cooperation, mutual respect. These are things the Council never offered." As the argument continued, a new message arrived at President Collins's office on Earth. It was from the Council of 12, the secret leadership group that had really controlled galactic politics for centuries. The message was simple and desperate. Terms accepted. Any terms. Please help us. Mary Collins read the message twice, then handed it to her Chief of Staff, General Pete Rodriguez. Pete was a stocky man with gray hair and kind eyes who had served in the Federation military for 30 years. What do you think, Pete? Pete smiled grimly. I think your predecessor's words still apply, ma'am. Too little. Too late. Outside Mary's office window, construction crews worked on the new Federal Assembly building. It was designed to house representatives from all the species that had chosen to join the growing Terran Federation, rather than cling to the dying council. The building was larger than the old council chamber, but it was built on principles of equality and mutual respect. As another day ended in the human capital, reports continued to flow in about the collapse of the old order. But these reports no longer caused concern in human space. They were simply reminders that sometimes, walking away from a bad situation is the only way to find something better. The galaxy was learning that respect could not be demanded. It had to be earned. And those who learned this lesson too late would have to live with the consequences of their choices. 2 years had passed since the Great Walkout, and the galaxy looked completely different. The old Galactic Council still existed, but it was like a shadow of what it used to be. Where once it had controlled 800 star systems, now it barely managed 200. The Great Alliance that had kept peace for centuries had broken into dozens of small groups, trade partnerships, and tiny empires. Humanity had not just survived without the Council, they had grown stronger than ever before. The Terran Federation now controlled over 400 star systems, almost twice what they had owned before leaving the Council. Without the old restrictions on expansion and development, human colonies spread quickly through unexplored parts of space. Admiral Tony Richards stood on the bridge of the TFS Independence watching his deep space fleet patrol the new frontier. Tony was a tall man with brown hair and sharp eyes who had spent 20 years exploring unknown regions of space. His ships were sleek and modern, much more advanced than anything the old Council had ever built. Admiral, called Lieutenant Sarah, Walsh from the communication station, we're receiving signals from a new species in the Tau Ceti system. They call themselves the Singing Crystals. Tony smiled. Another first contact. How many is that this quarter? 6 new species, sir. All of them want to establish peaceful trade relationships with the Federation. The Singing Crystals seem particularly interested in our music and art. Tony nodded. This was happening more and more often. Species that had never been contacted by the Council were eager to meet humans. Many of them had heard stories about the species that had stood up to galactic bullies and chosen freedom over submission. Set course for Tau Ceti, Tony ordered. Let's go say hello. Back on Earth, Dr. Rachel Kim stood before a packed auditorium, presenting her annual economic report to the Federation Assembly. Rachel was a small woman with black hair and thick glasses who had become famous for predicting the Council's economic collapse months before it happened. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored alien delegates, she began, looking out at an audience that included humans and representatives from 60 different species. I'm pleased to report that Federation GDP growth is at 8.7% this year. Unemployment is virtually zero, and our Technology Advancement Index shows we're progressing 3 times faster than we did under Council restrictions. The audience applauded loudly. Sitting in the front row, President Mary Collins smiled with satisfaction. Mary had been re-elected 6 months ago with the biggest vote margin in Federation history. People were happy with independence, and they trusted her to keep humanity free. Without having to share our innovations through mandatory technology transfers, Rachel continued, we're advancing faster than ever before. Our new quantum engines are twice as efficient as anything the Council ever developed. Our medical research has eliminated 4 major diseases this year alone, and our agricultural advances are feeding not just our own people, but millions of refugees who have fled to Federation space. On the former Council station Nexus Prime, things were very different. The station was now only half occupied and struggling to keep basic systems running. Broken lights flickered in empty corridors, and many sections had been sealed off to save power. Chancellor Vrex sat in what used to be the Grand Council chamber, now reduced to a small meeting room. Only 18 species remained in the council, down from the hundreds that had once filled the great amphitheater. His purple tentacles drooped with exhaustion as he tried to manage yet another crisis. The banking system has completely collapsed, reported his economic advisor, a nervous creature whose species name was unpronounceable to most others. 3 more worlds declared independence this week. The insectoid collective is threatening to invade the Rigel sector. Vrex closed his 4 eyes and tried to remember when everything had gone so wrong. It seemed like yesterday that the Council had been the most powerful force in the galaxy. Now they couldn't even protect their own member worlds from raiders and rebels. "Sir," said Clythe quietly, "perhaps it's time to consider the unthinkable." "What do you mean?" "Formal dissolution of the Council. We could try to negotiate individual peace treaties with the major powers. Maybe some of our members could join the Terran Federation or one of the other new alliances." Vrex's tentacles writhed with anger and shame. "Never. The Galactic Council has maintained order for over 3 centuries. We cannot simply give up." But, even as he spoke the words, Vrex knew they were hollow. The Council had already given up the day they voted to steal human colonies. They just hadn't realized it yet. Meanwhile, the Aquatic Alliance was thriving in their new confederation. The fish-like beings and other water-breathing species had formed their own government based on the human model of equality and cooperation. Their leader, a wise old creature called Deep Current Speaker, gave interviews praising humanity's example. "The humans showed us that we didn't need the Council's permission to govern ourselves," Deep Current Speaker said through a translation device. "We have formed partnerships with the Terran Federation and 17 other independent governments. Our trade has increased by 200%, and our people are happier than they have been in generations." In human space, the transformation was even more dramatic. The new Federal Assembly building in New Geneva was finally complete, and it was impressive to see. The building was larger than the old council chamber, but it felt warmer and more welcoming. Representatives from dozens of species worked together in committees, making decisions by consensus rather than by the vote of powerful bullies. President Collins walked through the assembly hall, greeting delegates from various worlds and species. There was Captain Jim Powell, now the Federation's Director of Colonial Affairs. Dr. Helen Garcia had been elected as the Federation's first Alien Affairs Secretary. Admiral Susan Blake commanded the largest peacekeeping fleet in galactic history, but unlike the old Council forces, her ships were welcomed wherever they went. "Ma'am," said General Pete Rodriguez, approaching with the daily briefing, "we've received another formal request from the Council Remnant. They're offering us complete control over galactic defense policy in exchange for rejoining their organization." Colin stopped walking and looked at Pete with surprise. "Complete control? They're willing to give us veto power over everything?" "Yes, ma'am. Essentially, they want us to run the galaxy for them while they keep the fancy titles and ceremonial positions." Collins shook her head in amazement. 2 years ago, they wouldn't even let us vote on decisions that affected our own colonies. Now they want to hand us control of everything. What should I tell them? Collins looked around the assembly hall, where humans and aliens worked together as equals, solving problems through cooperation rather than threats. "Tell them thanks, but we're busy building something better." The final blow to the old council came when the Reptilian Dominion announced they were joining the Terran Federation as full members. The lizard-like beings had been one of the council's founding species, and their departure marked the end of any pretense that the old system could survive. Their representative, a dignified creature named Scale of Justice, explained their decision to a gathering of Federation delegates. "For 3 centuries, we believed that order could only be maintained through hierarchy and control. The humans have shown us that cooperation and respect create much stronger bonds than fear and submission." On Mars, retired Ambassador Jake Morrison sat in his garden, reading the news on his tablet while his wife Linda worked with her flowers. The morning sun felt warm on his face, and for the first time in decades, he felt truly at peace. "Listen to this," he said to Linda. "The Vraxian Empire just lost their capital world to rebels. War Prime Thaklor has been overthrown by his own people." Linda looked up from her roses, dirt on her gloves, and a satisfied smile on her face. "The same Thaklor who called us primitive?" "The very same. Apparently his people got tired of losing wars and decided they needed new leadership." Jake scrolled through more news reports. The galaxy was still chaotic in many places, but new patterns were emerging. Species that embraced cooperation and equality were thriving. Those that clung to the old ways of dominance and control were falling apart. "You know what the best part is?" Jake said, setting down his tablet and looking out at the city of New Geneva in the distance. "We didn't have to conquer anyone or force anyone to change. We just walked away and built something better. Now everyone else wants to copy what we did." Linda smiled and returned to her gardening. Sometimes the best way to win a fight is to refuse to participate in it. As the sun set over the Martian colony, construction crews worked on yet another expansion of the Federal Assembly complex. More species were applying to join the Federation every month, drawn by stories of freedom, prosperity, and mutual respect. The old Galactic Council continued to exist in its reduced form, controlling fewer worlds each month as members left to join more successful alliances. Some observers predicted it would collapse entirely within another year. Others thought it might survive as a small regional government for the few species that preferred the old ways. But nobody doubted that the galaxy had changed forever on the day humans walked out of that council chamber. The lesson had been learned and spread throughout the stars. Respect could not be demanded or voted into existence. It had to be earned, through actions, maintained through fairness, and shared through cooperation. Humanity had shown the galaxy a better way to live among the stars, and that example would shine like a beacon for generations to come, reminding everyone that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from a broken system and build something new.